someone has a piece of land, they want to log it, cut the trees. There's an argument for not doing that. You might pay them not to do it. And you're saying the organization to carry out that transaction is, you're testing the idea of whether a civil agent is better than the government coming in and going, do it this way.
Yeah.
So can you give me one example from Germany where that might be an issue? The top-down versus the local? I'm just still having trouble in getting confidence.
I mean, the most I can think of one within France. It's about water quality. It's this retail company. So one could be there are contracts between land managers and the business company to improve water quality. And this is also when they also have agri-environmental schemes in place, but those are horizontal, which means everyone can take part. If they comply with the regulations, then they get the money, and it doesn't take into account where in the spatial context it would be most efficient, because so you also pay money to land managers who are not very relevant in this context. So you waste money. And then this example, it's of course it's a watershed, and it's only the land manager that matter most for this company, for the watershed where they get the water.
Maybe I can give you an example from Germany, from Community Foundation. They're in Spreewald, I don't know, it's a small region, and they are famous for the cucumbers they have there. And the Community Foundation start to make an own trademark for that region. So it's for agricultural things, and that's their that they work together and have their own things, and that pays and they're paying for that they work together and use a trademark. And so if you have a government there who would say, let's do that, I think no one would do it. But if a community foundation comes together and the people of the region come together and say, okay, let's work together, I think that's a much better approach to make it top down.
I guess I'm just, sorry, then I'll quit it. Ultimately, there has to be a source of funds and an ultimate recipient for the funds to do something different, or preserve something, or maintain some ecological services. If I think of how we work here, so if the government doesn't do it, it gives the money to the Sierra Club, and then the Sierra Club does it. Is that kind of thing you're thinking? Or the Society for the Preservation of the Adirondacks? Or
I mean, the starting point, I guess, for this project was that these government approaches are so not well accepted, and when you have more individual arrangement, then you can improve acceptance and more farmers. That's the point. You want to get more people involved in such.
So a typical forest in Germany it's protected by the landowner as well as there's a government protection of that forest?
It depends on who owns the forest, of course. And there are state forests. All forests are managed. I think that's the main difference. All forests are managed forests. And yeah, you of course, when you own a forest as a private person, then you can log it if you want to.
I'm interested in understanding the landscape category that you're talking about here, because I don't have a good sense of what kind of ecosystem services are happening in that landscape category.
I think they are more about aesthetics, like what kind of services make people feel at home in a certain landscape, and they identify themselves in the landscape, and then they don't want to see changes to their landscape, and Yeah, again, this Spreewald region, which is, there's a lot of water and there are very small patches of land that are in agricultural production, and the farmer has to go there by boat, and it's very expensive and not very sustainable, but people like their landscape as it is because it's also very famous touristic regions. So there is an agri-environmental scheme that ensures that the farmer goes on with farming. So the tourists and the people living there can still enjoy the landscape as it is for several hundred years. So conserve an historic landscape.
So are all the foundations funding projects domestically? So all the German organizations are doing projects based in Germany and all the US?
No, they were also asked, they are active on all levels. There are also international, very regional foundations that are centered on a certain landscape and yeah, all kinds of.
I guess this is a sort of a follow-up to what Bob was talking about. I learned in my master's program that civil society that has a historical paradox between wanting the government to step in and do something, as you mentioned, for the environment, and also being mistrustful of the government. So I think that they may not have to be mutually exclusive of each other, because, you know, there's only so much that a community foundation is going to undertake before they say, hey, this isn't for us to do, let the government handle it. And then when the government handles it, they're like I agree, in the United States, our environmental policies haven't done much in terms of our future, the future of the environment. So it may be that they're not mutually exclusive, and it may be weighted on whether maybe the government has some role in collaboration or something, but I don't see them being separate, completely separate.
They are always like intertwined and mixed, and they cooperate, so it's more that they supplement each other, and it's not that they are alternative approaches to each other. So I think sometimes it starts with where a civil society initiative is more in opposition to what the government has. So in the initial phase, maybe it's more only the action of the civil society organization. But over time, they try to cooperate, and they also try to find funds, which is always a crucial issue. And then they more cooperate.
So I wanted to just a little bit maybe also details about the case study you mentioned about landscape, historical landscape. If someone prefer this landscape to stay as it is, so who is the active agent here? So the civil society who is involved in actually if any payment for this kind of service exists, if farmers get paid, who is the one who?
Yeah, for this example, it was, I think, an initiative from the civil society, not primarily because of the environment, but also because it's such a good region for tourism. So there were like economic reasons behind it, but they went together. So again, it was like they found their mutual interests and they build up a coalition. They have a certain label that labels their product, that they were produced in this Spreewald region, and they can get higher prices. So over time, this region tends to get bigger, but it was really weird because then some farmers were excluded because the majority of their land was not within this region. So it can take some weird developments when you try to find such a tailor-made approach for a certain region, because region is not a well-defined, it's not like an administrative, because landscape is like something that is in between like natural boundaries and administrative boundaries, and we have to find a compromise.
I just want to, I'm trying to ground myself exactly in what this is, and I think I'm getting a feel for it, but I want to present one example and see if you're agreeing that. So in Romania, especially in the Transylvania region, in the lower section, they have very old grasslands that basically, up until communism, they were managed, you know, for 800 years the exact same way. And most of them were remote enough that they weren't actually touched by communism, but now that things are developing, there's changes. So there's an organization there, and they have funding from Prince Charles, from Orange, and I don't remember what their other big funder was. So they're set up that way, and then they were accessing European Union funds so that farmers in that area who manage their grasslands a specific way would receive 200 euros per hectare as a payment to manage it that way, which usually reduced it to only 2, maybe 3 cuttings in a year from the potential of 4. So is that, as I understand it, that would be a very concrete example of kind of how this is working, but I just want to make sure that...
Yeah, that's exactly would be a case study we would be looking for.
I was going to ask about, money, it seems to me, is an issue here. Sorry, that's obvious. But, and I think, you know about the Vermont Land Trust and the Nature Conservancy. And I think both of those organizations, especially the latter, said the government isn't going to do this, so we're going to raise money privately and just do it, especially the Nature Conservancy, which is fine if they can get the funds, and they've been very successful. But if it's a matter of there's a certain amount of governmental funds that might be used for this, and should the government try to spend it directly, or should it pass it through civil organizations? That's what that's the one I'm trying to understand. Over time, it would seem to me an organization like this, as it got stronger, would be less and less likely to get government money and have to just go out there and compete in the open market for it.
I think land trusts are a specific category because they want to secure land, and then they, as I understand it, then later on the government takes it over. Is it?
That's how the Nature Conservancy typically works.
It just struck me that, let's say you had a what do you call it, a foundation that was managed top down. It's just somewhere in there has to be some distinctions about the governance issue because, okay.
I think this is one important, very important issue. I mean, one thing is that they all receive funds, so you can say if there are people willing to give or donate money to them, then they have the support of the people, and if they don't get any funds, then okay, then they don't have any support. But of course, they might have the support of business companies also. So this is an important issue, I think.
Yeah, I've really been interested in incentives versus sanctions, like making people do things or providing incentives. I think incentives is part of this too. So I've often thought, given how much environmental degradation has already occurred, I mean, we can't just go business as usual with the money. We have to really find a way to get a lot of money to clean up a lot of these sites, especially the Superfund sites. So I wonder, would be taxing people in civil society, would that, either by incentives or sanctions, be something that could be effective or even part of this?
I mean, taxing would be within the responsibility of the government, of course. So it's not like maybe we also want to see how these different actors build coalitions. So maybe the civil society initiatives can play a role by supporting the idea or something. So yeah.
Okay.
But I think taxing is not something that is specific.
I mean, just the you answered my question, just the concept, not that they could do it, but just the concept of it that could emerge from civil society to say,
they
hey,
could promote the idea and advertise for it, for the concept.
Thank you very much for your presentation.